Hi, it is noon on Wednesday, and that means this is Writing Wednesday. And my guest today is Andrew Nicholls, who is a wonderful writer and also lives here. And he's perfectly handy for an interesting Writing Wednesday. We talk a lot about writing. Andrew's a writer, I'm a writer. He's a comedy writer, and I am a novelist, as you know. We talk a lot about writing. He overhears Writing Wednesdays, and often we have some interesting conversations afterwards. One of the things that we have been talking about is kind of what helps you finish a book? What helps you, what helps kind of hold your hand or move you toward the book that you wanted to write? Hi, Miranda. Hi, Jeffrey. Good to see you. So Andrew has been kind enough to join us for Writing Wednesday today. And as I cannot figure out how to do this in any other way, we are still in the tiny frame of Facebook Live. And we had been talking about what sustains and guides us as writers as we shape our books, as we shape a story. Andrew also writes for TV and screen, so it's like what shapes you towards the ending of a movie or towards the ending of a pilot. Or he's also a much more frequently published short story writer than I am. So he also has the short story perspective, as some of you. Hi, Wendy. So anyway, and he's been nice enough to join me today for a talk about how he has a really interesting way he thinks of a story or a novel that I'm just really taken by it, and so I wanted to share him with you guys. So, Andrew, tell us about your sense of what steers you towards the appropriate ending for your book.
We've been talking about endings, and so I mentioned that I had asked during interviews with other writers. I often go up to them, short story writers, novelists, and sometimes with screenwriters, and say, "Do you do this thing that I do?" And to a person, they almost always say no, which I was always surprised by. And I started literary writing, novels, short stories when I met Janet. So I had been doing TV for a long time, and thought, well, perhaps it's a TV thing. But I imagine, when I was looking for a title for this, and Janet was looking for a title for today's Writing Wednesday, and had the same issue. What do we call this? I imagine myself towards an ending almost always before I even begin a project, particularly anything long, anything that I know is going to take me a while. I think of what it's going to feel like in a slightly synesthetic way of giving it a color, a shape, a flavor, but more just, I want it to be a little bit like that thing that I enjoyed once, or that movie that would have been so good if only it had been in black and white, or if only it had all female characters instead of robots, or whatever they did. Some feeling animates me towards starting a longer project, especially because of the time that it's going to take, that it's going to be taking up my life. I also start a document and open it up and make these arguments that I'm making now. I make them out loud with myself, and I write them down. Is this worth it? What am I aiming for? And the feeling is of what it's going to feel like to the reader, to a viewer, when it's done.
It's interesting because I have often heard at AWP or at other writer events, people who say they know the ending before they start. And I'm going like, how could they possibly know the ending before they start? But I think that it's more what you're talking about.
It's not the ending, they all end up in a cabbage cart going down the road. It's not like that. Although John Irving said in an interview that for 12 novels in a row, he knew the last sentence before he began, and it never changed. He said, not even to the punctuation. So that's a very specific thing. It doesn't mean he knew how to get there, but it means that he knew probably in the way I'm talking about, the feeling that would have been generated, that will have been generated by the time you get to the end.
And so it's like what I've been talked about last week was, building a doorway and walking through it. It's a bit like that. It's like the flavor of your book. Yeah. Are you writing a psychological thriller that's going to have a certain Scandinavian flair, a certain black and white sort of quality, lonely quality, misty quality to it, or noir, or just the fragrance of it almost?
And you can put so many botanicals into this mix. It doesn't even have to be, in fact, usually what I'm talking about usually isn't describable in a few adjectives. It's not like, smell a sense of snow, but in Germany. It's not something that a TV or film executive or maybe even a publisher looking for a blurb would aim it towards. The market will respond to this thought. It's got so many parts in it, almost like a dream. When you try to describe a dream, you're talking about people and their names and where they went, but there's a feeling of the dream that is much more important. The thing that grips you, especially after you've just woken up, that feeling is not just the people and what they said, or what they spent their money on, or what kind of cars they drove. There's not an eerie or uncanny, but often there's just this additional, this savor, this feeling
it's
that
like
you get.
It's what makes a Kafka, when we say Kafka-esque,
yeah,
we know what that means. It doesn't mean we know the ending of the trial or the castle or whatever, but whatever it is, it's going to have it
will have created an emotional reaction, a feeling that you just get when you see the book on the shelf. You just see even the spine of something that you maybe even don't remember after having read it so long ago, the names of the characters, or particularly what happened. But the atmosphere, the perfume that it gave you, is perfectly there in your mind. I start projects, and I've said to Janet, I even do this for jokes, for individual one-liners. I've written with a co-writer for many decades, and sometimes we get to the point where we will say, I want a line that's kind of like that thing, like that line in the middle of Funny Thing Happened in the Forum, but with geese, and we know exactly what we're talking about. We know the shape, or I will say, here's the construction, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, ever since I da-da-da-da. And he knows what I mean. He knows what I'm working towards.
Because Andrew and his writing partner have worked together for 40 years, and they do sort of read each other's minds. They've had similar references, so they can say, it's like that bad movie we saw, blah, 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 and they'll know exactly what they're talking about. This is a conversation that will go on between you and you, as you try to characterize, and I do have it, what you're looking for.
I do have it written down too. I mean, I write what I call a quit doc, which is sort of an ironic way of saying talk yourself out of it. But I do it for long projects, a novel or a screenplay, something that I want to know before I start if I've got the tools and the mentality and the stamina to actually do it. So I open a doc with the same name as the project. I call it my quit doc, and every feeling or idea I have about it, positive, negative, commercial, I put in there, and I argue with myself about whether I can do this, and if so, what will it be like? And all these words that I have about, I want it to be kind of like Patrick Susskind's Perfume, but more contemporary, the idea of being absorbed in a sense, and how do I get that? I don't want to do perfume, he's done that. And I just type all this out and reread it as I'm working.
Miranda says, I'm finding that I enjoy books, TV, and film that are brave enough to leave things out. The ones who don't feel the need to wrap up everything. The moments left out can tell us something and open up our own imagination. I find that interesting. Yeah, and that's a flavor. It's a flavor of kind of like a request that the reader move forward and do some of the work. So there'll be a bit of a tease. It'll be a little of a challenge. It will, if you're talking about colors, like Andrew sometimes thinks of these things in terms of colors, it won't be like a splashy, brightly colored picture with sharp black outlines that Miranda would like. She would like something that a little more abstract, something that leaves, works in a subtler set
Shirley
of
Jackson
tones.
instead of Tim Burton. Something that gives you an infusion rather than a stew. Something where you can see the involvement of the ingredients, but none of them takes over. It's not apple pie, but there's apple in it. And it's an advantage of working by yourself as opposed to collaboration on something like this, because it's also a disadvantage when you're working with someone you can't communicate this precisely, or you think you have, and you get halfway through and you realize you haven't. But you said it was like so-and-so. You said it was like Solaris, or you said it was going to be like Batman. But not in this way.
But not my Batman, not my Solaris.
It's like you said Streetcar Named Desire. Yeah, but I'm thinking of the ending of Streetcar. What do you feel? You feel frustration, inevitability, poverty. You can see the cheap furniture. You sweat and hot nights and walking up dark stairways and that feeling. And then, your collaborator can rightly say, but you've set this on a spaceship, with all aluminum and steel. Right. So we don't have the old furniture, but something of that feeling of hope, defeated, brave, persistent hope, and the pathos at the end. Can we do that with robots? I'm always recalibrating too in the middle of things to see if I'm getting there. And so the way I find this useful is if I've articulated it well enough, and often for a shorter thing, for a half-hour script, I would just sort of have it in mind and go, oh yeah, kind of like that. And you can change your mind as you go. You can find you're rowing towards...
That's interesting.
You're rowing towards Bergman. You're thinking, okay, black and white, large, sharp edges, deep shadows, dark blacks, close-up, angularity, wide-angle lens, feeling of mystery. And then you come up with an idea for a scene in the middle where you realize you're actually more like parodying that, or you're more like using it as the bad guy's delusion for where the main character is supposed to be in their career, in their life. And it's this sudden, swift kick. But as long as that gives you something useful, now you see a different ending. I'm always looking for what people will be saying walking out of the theater.
And then you go back and you work on the doorway.
You retrofit.
You work on that doorway in so that it's coherent with where you're going with it. If you discover that your little intimate parlor room drama is beginning to become more political, and by the end you're going to be in a big political thing, then you're going to want to revisit the doorway that you started with and make sure that it will lead to that taste, that sensation that you want for that book.
And I've even had the experience of changing genre or even changing format. That was something I've finished recently as a 6-hour TV limited series, which started out as a short story. And when I wrote the short story 10 years ago, it was going to be a novel, but I got to a part in it which I realized was going to require such skill, such detail, that in a novel you have to go with the character where they go, and I just didn't think I was capable of making it interesting, so I wrote it as a long, short story. And over the years I've looked at it and thought, I can make this a novel, and then I thought I could make it a movie. And then just one piece fell into place. I remembered something from years ago, a little detail, something I saw in a town on vacation in England, which was I asked what's behind that high wall, and someone said, oh, that's the Magic Factory. I thought, there's a magic factory in this town? Who works there? Well, I don't know. They're not allowed to talk about it. I thought, that is great. And it changed. It wasn't a short story or a novel anymore. I could see it as a 6-part series. I added characters who were as amazed as I was. The flavor of the ending, what I was imagining at the end. You finish the last episode and you sit and you turn off the TV and you think, or you put down the book and someone says, what was that like? And you say, oh, you have a feeling. And it changed the feeling that I wanted to have. And it added characters for me because I needed to have somebody, an experiencer for this principal sense of amazement and wonder and the feeling of being an outsider when everybody else knows something and you're the only one who doesn't. I wanted that. And so in the document, in my quit doc, which eventually just got pared down to nothing because I used all the dialogue I typed in it, I put this argument, this discussion. I want it to feel like this. It should be sort of like so-and-so. And every now and then I'd be out on a walk or driving, and I'd think of some movie I saw years ago. I couldn't even remember the title, but it had that. That's what I remembered about it. So yeah, you can see how inchoate some of this is and how hard to describe.
And for me, it's that I want a certain very specific flavor, and I find that using a playlist that I write to, usually music with no words, because words can be very distracting, but a certain playlist will keep the feeling that I'm trying to create together.
Yeah.
It'll permeate. I've done that with all of my books. I've had a certain playlist that I would play over and over and over because the feeling, the emotion, the experience of those songs is the world that I want. It's almost like creating a soundtrack.
And I have writer friends who do this precisely, and novelist friends. And I've only ever done one screenplay, where I did specifically this, and then I actually put the songs, many of the songs of this one songwriter, the way Paul Thomas Anderson did with Amy Mann in Magnolia. I've put the songs in the movie, in the screenplay, because there's so many of them express the angst of this one particular British pub singer that they just seem to belong in this little London drama. Otherwise, I find music too annoying to write to.
Yeah, see, to me, it's about preserving the feeling over time, because a novel I would be working on it for, 4 or 5 years. And you change so much during the years that a novel takes that it tends to morph over time if you don't find a way to stabilize the feeling that you're trying to get. So you're not going to have this soundtrack full of sort of electronica, mysterious, droning stuff, and then suddenly put in a show tune, where it's easy, if you're working on something for a long time, it's easy to forget what the hell you're doing and put in something that breaks the mood, that breaks the spell that you're trying to create.
Although in some long forms I've seen, and I mentioned the Grand Inquisitor sequence in Dostoevsky, but it doesn't change that mood that much. But it is a huge jolting change in the shape. Or in screenplays, frequently you will throw in something it's the nutmeg that you're not supposed to eat, or the bay leaf in the soup you're not supposed to eat. You can sometimes. And I wonder if people often take out something that would have been perfectly marvelous. I get unproduced copies of screenplays sometimes. You get the screenplay and then the movie comes out. And sometimes some of my favorite scenes in the screenplay have been cut by the time the thing hits the screen. Someone said, well, this isn't
necessary.
It's not in the same
See,
field.
that's why fiction, long fiction, that's why a novel is a different kind of storytelling, where there is room to have a kind of an unrepeatable, weird scene that isn't immediately serviceable. The scene doesn't exactly lead to the next scene. It's not in the main line of thought, the main line of action, but it has a strong reverberation. It takes like an image or a flavor or a theme that comes up, a question that comes up, and it takes you down a side road that you can visit a side road in a novel and have something happen, like the Grand Inquisitor in Dostoevsky, in The Brothers Karamazov, where one of the brothers talks to, it's kind of a devilish religious figure who argues for order, even based on something completely evil, that order is more necessary than chaos. And it's important to have that element. And the character needs to struggle with that. You need that flavor. You need that flavor in the soup. I mean, what a good
But there are
image.
some people, I mean, that book
like
is sometimes published without it. People do sometimes publish it without the Grand Inquisitor. And I remember when
you're kidding.
we talked about Karamazov in college, and I remember the professor saying, don't get this edition.
Oh, I've never heard of that.
You know.
But it's seeing your symphony that you're creating, but it's like what you don't want to be creating, Beethoven's Fifth or Rachmaninoff piano concerto and then get distracted or just at year 3 forgetting what the feeling that you've been trying for. Yes.
I see.
The feeling that you've been trying for, and then you kind of forget and you start putting in elements that just don't have anything to do with what
you get drawn
the bigger
off,
structure
you get drawn
is.
into your own story. A character gets hit on the head and has to go to the hospital, and all of a sudden you're thinking hospital for 3 months while you write, and it's not the story.
Right.
But it is where you have to go. You have to deal with the facts on the ground.
But sometimes you get, in novel writing, for myself and for students that I've worked with, the clients, sometimes they get led off into the bushes and the novel just loses its way. And a great way to get back in touch with your book is to think about that flavor that you were trying to get to. Are you, if you're trying to get that 40s noir feeling and you find yourself at a kitchen table drama, you go, oh, maybe not. Maybe this, maybe I need to, if that is what I wanted to do, to recognize that you got led off into the bushes and grab onto that. The playlist, super helpful. So we have a question from Wendy. So why don't we
and they
take
say,
this?
do you do the doc for each of your short stories? And then do you have one for the collection? Well, I've never managed a collection.
This is quit doc.
The quit doc, or you could say
quitting.
the preparation doc or the layout. I always have an idea of the shape of a short story, and I can hold it more clearly in my head. We were in a mall once and went to Janet and I were shopping for shoes and stood on some electronic device that supposedly measured your foot and then there was a screen and you stood on it and it told you what kind of shoe and what shape and your insole depth and your plantar fasciitis possibility and how you pronated and I just had a flash of an idea of a poor unfortunate kid working in a store that had a device like this for selling underwear, and I started to men. And I saw the title first, Measure Your Wedge. And I could see this, basically. I could see the laughter, and so I worked towards keeping it in that spirit. And I wrote it pretty quickly, it was like 2 days write, and then a lot of editing. But I didn't have to write a document to support that because it was so concise. And I've never worked at a mall, but it seemed like everybody has spent so much time in malls that they know, that you're facing another store, and people go in and out, and if you're a kid, you just hate working there, but you have to put on a happy face. All that stuff was pretty easy to imagine. So I wouldn't have done a document for something really short. I do these, but I still have it. I still have I imagine somebody living on a little island where all of a sudden time starts to change and goes slower for the island than it does for the mainland. And that creeped me out thinking of it, but I could already see the implications and just like a fog of confusion around the main character. He doesn't want to go to the mainland, but why is time changing?
So you don't make a document at all for your short story?
For that I didn't. I made notes, and sometimes I will write down dialogue. Because I've always, even for pitching sitcoms, movies, and series, Daryl and I, my writing partner, and I have always pitched with dialogue instead of with adjectives. I hate adjective writing. She's an astute mid-30s. I would rather hear what she says when she finds a bug in her apple. I don't think the adjectival writing is all that helpful. It doesn't get the flavor, and dialogue really does. And someone here earlier, which scrolled up off the screen, was asking about, oh yes, so there you go, Courtney, my biggest struggle is dialogue. Boy, some people, are really fluid with dialogue and write it really easily, but it's not always good. It needs a certain potency and conflict. And dialogue, as you always say, is for conflict.
So
It's
this
for
is
disagreements.
interesting.
Yeah.
Grant says, Bonnie and Clyde, the script was written with Flatt and Scruggs music playing over and over in the background, according to the interviews of the writers who put it together.
Wow, I can picture that.
So they have
Yeah.
to have, and it keeps you into the mood. It keeps you into the mood that you're creating in the
A person
audience.
could do what you do. You sometimes cut out pictures of locations and characters, actors from
Yeah.
movies and things, and put them around the room, and so you can glance and see that expression, that snarl or that smile or that idiot's face, and it plants you there right next to where you're writing with the images that you kind of want to have floating around.
And stabilizing your location and using the senses. Is there a pervasive smell? Is there a season? Is there weather? The weather then provides that mood.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if Richard Russo does this, but if you look at Empire Falls or Nobody's Fool, that feeling he creates of that little town, that little North New England town, the snow, the cold, long after you finish the book and even forgotten the details. And the movie of Nobody's Fool, I think he wrote the screenplay as well. And he did it with a screenplay for something called, it's got the word ice in it, The Ice Job. It's a heist film with John Cusack, but the totally permeating sense of the town, the place. You almost feel that if the camera was turned off and you were there, you could turn around and you know what's across the street. And I don't know how exactly he does it, because it's not a matter of camera work or in the books of particularly description. The ice, the river flowed under the ice and all that. You just get this chilly, you get the feeling of, the income of the people living in this town, their politics, just from incidental glancing shots of dialogue and exchanges in the coffee shop and small witticisms, and then pulling up the collar of a coat before going out of doors.
The cold, if you think of Wuthering Heights, would it achieve the mood if it wasn't set in windswept Yorkshire in bad weather? I mean, it already sets the mood. The bleakness, the desperation, the stoniness, to stabilize your mood and where you're going to end up. But I found myself thinking last night when we were talking about doing this, about the novel that I'm writing, and what feeling tone do I want to end up with? Do I want the reader to end up with at the end?
Do you think of other projects, things that you want it to be like?
I started doing that. I started thinking about the amount of comedy, because it's a lighter book than has more comedic qualities than what I would normally do. And so it's like, so I would like a little bit of a comedic quality, but a certain stripe, and just trying to, even asking the question, refining the question of what kind of feeling quality do I want in this book. Just asking the questions is super helpful. So let's see what.
And I find that you don't even have to think of projects with similar characters, settings, or challenges. Sometimes there's just something you got for seeing an old Bruce Dern movie or something, for Silent Running or a Chariot film, and there's just something about the dust or the color of the light or the feeling of yearning or of times long lost. Dennis Johnson does this really well in Train Dreams, in a couple of his things, in Jesus, His Son as well, where at the end there's just such a feeling of how much has been lost. He says those times were gone forever. Or he says, those times are gone now. I mean, that place is gone. I mean, I know where it is, but I can't touch it. And I think maybe that's an example of something Irving-like that he had in mind to drive towards. It feels that way to me. But often, it's stone soup. You think all those elements were put in there, and then they were all taken out. In Wuthering Heights, I don't know how many, it's been so long since I read it, how many references there are to the stony moors and the barren heath. It doesn't take many. But the way the characters relate and the distance between them, the distance they have to travel to see each other, and the length of time that she takes going out looking for Heathcliff.
And just the wind and the night, it's always incorporated in every scene. There's always weather. There's always weather. You never, just
even when you're inside,
put on a jogging suit and go out.
It's rattling the panes, or someone opens the door and a candle flickers. So
you always have to deal with it, and I think that's a super way to go. It helps stabilize things. So Grant says, some years ago I typed with a manual typewriter a script with country western music in the background. Years later, when I was in New York, a film critic prof loved the rhythm and the music, felt it as they read the script. Yeah, and I don't think it has anything to do with the typewriter you use or the pen or whatever. It is the writer, it's the rhythm in the prose. It's what's on the page. When you read it aloud, you'll hear it. That's why I like to read it aloud, because there's a music along with the mood and what you end up with. In prose, there's a music in the sentences, in the language, that provides its own little soundtrack. It is the music of the book.
And in a stage play, for example, you had to do it all with dialogue. And I will sometimes take things and switch them. I did a stage play a little while ago that started out as a one-liner, as just a joke. It could have been a cartoon. And I've moved things back and forth between stage and prose, because you can't do everything with dialogue, with confrontational dialogue, or sometimes it's too hard, or you would have to add too many characters for it to be practicable.
So here's a question. What if I had no original feeling? We're talking about shaping the book towards an ending, and sustaining that original feeling that you had of what, the kind of the flavor of the book was going to be. And here's a question. What if I had no original feeling?
Yeah. I spent a lot of time doing television, including sitcoms. And sitcom is a shape. It's construction. It's half hour. It's familiar. Something surprising, fun, and challenging has to happen to a likable character who later learns something from it without changing anything about the premise of the thing. So that's very mechanical. And you can do that without the feeling. You can write a limerick without the feeling, because it's construction. I almost always have something. What if you have nothing, but you have a great idea for an opening sequence? A certain type of bank robbery. I mean, I met somebody, a writer friend once. We were coming out of a movie together, and I asked him what he was on, and he told me that just the opening of a film that he'd started. I don't think he ever wrote it, but it grabbed me so much that I could see how you could be grabbed by it. It was a heist in a bank. When they go into the bank the next morning, it's been broken into, but stuff has been added instead of taken out. And I thought, oh, that is so cool. I want to know more. And he said, yeah, I do too. So he didn't know what was going to happen. I think he had a couple of ideas at the time. So he had no idea where it was going or what it was going to feel like. He had a beginning. That's very perilous. I would say that a lot of projects I've started that haven't gone anywhere. The Quick document started prophetically with me not knowing where it was. It's not knowing where it's going, because you don't write towards knowing where it's going necessarily. You don't know what's going to happen.
Grant says, try to flip your iPhone horizontally. I'm going to tell me if this works or whether we're just lying on our sides.
Or we could just suck in our cheeks.
Can you see us?
Rotate your device.
You cannot turn your phone while you're live.
This is a message that
So now we know. Next time we'll give that a try.
But you're seeing our best halves. You're seeing one pair of glasses between us. I think you can, but I think writing imaginative, concise, well-constructed scenes can lead you towards recognizing similarity with something you've enjoyed before, something of your own writing you've enjoyed before, and make you realize, oh, I can get there. The feeling of I can get there is one of the greatest feelings.
Yeah. And see, to me, it's all character. So in my work and in the work of many of our literary writers here, we start with a character in a situation. So it's not, the bank robbery isn't enough to make a character-driven novel or story. That it's the who that's important. So if I had this idea of a bank robbery where somebody leaves something instead of stealing it, I'm instantly needing to know who. Mm-hmm. Once I know who is my protagonist, then I can begin to unpack maybe why somebody.
The situation suggests character for me. I mean, mm-hmm. I heard the scene and I instantly imagine the investigator coming and going, what the hell is this? No, I don't need this. I imagine someone frustrated, which is funny, some way of amplifying my original feeling through character. And saying, no, I'm not going to do it. No, there's no crimes being committed here. I'm wanting to back out of it. It gives me ideas for characters and dialogue, the situation. And if it doesn't, then you go, okay, well, that was just a one-liner. That's just a joke. Or maybe it's a story I can have someone else tell someday if I need a story. At one time, my dad was a cop down the south someplace, and they broke into the hardware store and they left a bunch of stuff, and he never figured out why. Maybe it's an anecdote that does something to make someone sound more interesting, to give them an idea, because I jot all those things down too. You never know what you're going to do.
Here's something that what happens about if your feeling changes. You were saying that if you start out with sort of a heart of darkness feeling, that's what you want. You're going up into the heart of darkness with a small crew.
Apocalypse Now.
And then you realize that you're getting more into a Lord of the Flies situation where it's not so much getting up into the going up river, but more about the conflict between the people, and you start seeing more people. Then, if you're saying you've reimagined the feeling, so you suggest adding some characters.
And I think the part of whatever, in that specific example, you're writing towards the idea of Heart of Darkness, which is you're going towards a loathsome prospect through an arduous process, which you examine yourself, you examine your reason, you know you're going to end up somewhere scary and dark and challenging. You've been warned, but you have to do it. Okay, that's feeling. I can hang on to that. Wages of Fear, right? Or Sorcerer, that idea. You have to take this nice nitroglycerin and drive it across a bumpy road. And then your characters you've created just start to argue in a way that makes you realize you've got a kind of a thing like the characters in Alien, along the way. You've got this everybody pitted against everybody and kind of ignoring the principal threat, which is out there in the water, up the river, but they're starting to spat, and you're getting that William Golding, Lord of the Flies thing, and these people are turning on each other. And you can keep that on the boat. You can keep that where you're going and travel with it. But I think you would have to stop for a while and ask yourself all those questions. Have I set this up to serve what's going to be the ending? If I can see the ending now, like I've started with 3 characters and I'm on a boat or I'm in a spaceship. For what I'm picturing now, for the feeling I have of the ending, I need at least 5. I need someone to die. I need someone to give up. I need someone to become a traitor. I need someone else who undergoes a major change and scares the others. That's going to maybe 6. Maybe I need 6 people. And if you're not too far into the thing, I'd consider going back with this new end feeling in mind and considering the new shape and wondering how much it would, if it would derail your original idea, particularly, and just decide how attractive it is to you to change the thing at this point. I can, as you may tell, I toss a lot of things, or I put a lot of things aside over the years. And I've been doing this a long time, so I do have dozens of things where I decided part way that I wasn't quite up to it, which I think is okay too. I'd rather know that than come to the end of 100,000 words and realize it doesn't work.
Yeah, I find that I run out of what I know, so I'll get on the original feeling, I'll get a certain distance, maybe halfway through, maybe 80 pages, maybe halfway through, maybe 3/4 through. And then there's something missing. There's something missing in that soup, the feeling that I want. And maybe I add something to the playlist. Maybe I add, there's like one more ingredient that I missed. And I might get it at the end of a first draft, that there's still something missing. Sometimes, hi Zunaid, sometimes it's one of those side alley chapters where you just go somewhere and experience something that forever after adds a flavor, even though it doesn't necessarily, long fiction isn't one thing, A to B to C to D. Long fiction, you can go to 2' and then back to B, or
2'. Or
something.
We're doing mathematics now.
Well, something on a different axis.
Yeah.
That flavors the whole experience, but it doesn't necessarily tie in plot-wise to the forward motion.
And I've had, from doing a lot of television, selling a lot of pilots, I've had the interesting, not always useful experience of having created an experiment which had the same effect on other people it had on me, of exciting them with, we've never seen this before, and then got into production or made a pilot or made a few episodes and having everybody realize, wow, we'd never seen this before. I'm realizing this late in my career now, that Daryl and I were really good at jostling and startling in a half-hour or a 1-hour script, or in a 30-page document describing something. And the attraction to television, which is always going for that sparkly object, right, or for movies, is not always consistent with what you would need as a novelist, or even sometimes as a short story writer or playwright, is that bearing down on doing the true thing. And sometimes the true thing gets dropped because you had a funny idea about someone being in a bunny suit or something. And
yeah, watch out for that. See, this is what you have to watch out for. You
caught everybody's attention and you sold the thing. And then you can't cast it. So I've written many things that were very difficult to cast because you picture the most brilliant, attractive, persuasive, personable, humorous, dangerous, threatening. You put all these things into character as you can in a novel. But when you're writing it to be cast, the casting director looks at you and says, as Barbara Miller used to say to me, Andrew, God doesn't give with both hands. You want attractive, or do you want them to be able to act? So obviously everyone wants something to be long-term successful, but I think I have been lured often by changing course midstream when something really cool occurred to me in a 60-page and 100-page script, which wasn't necessarily in the best interest of it as an ongoing property. So for those of you interested in screenwriting, it's a separate thought. I think if you're writing a book, if you're writing a novel or a short story...
It's a danger. If anybody has seen somebody start a book, go a ways, and then they keep changing. They keep changing it. And I don't mean developing the ideas that they started with. I mean, the music keeps changing. It started out with, Rachmaninoff, so that, for the music metaphor, you'd start off with broody Rachmaninoff, and then somehow in year 2, it started being a little bit more, I don't know, what's a stark contrast?
Gilbert and Sullivan.
Yeah, it'll be like Gilbert and Sullivan. It's like, wait a second. So in a big book, in a big experience, in a long fiction, stabilizing the world is very important. Being able to keep the world that you've created, the mood you've created, keeping that stable while the action is going on is probably the biggest help you can give yourself. And it keeps it from morphing. And there you are, year 20, and you've basically written pieces of 10 different books.
And I would say, by the same token, it's something I would tell anyone writing science fiction, is beware of the, they all fall in a wormhole trick, or beware of the feeling that because you're writing fantasy or something where the laws of physics can change, where the laws of nature can change, beware of letting that lead you into magical solutions to problems. I'm finding in my curmudgeonly self that I'm drawn much more to movies in which problems are given to characters for whom they're problems. The Marvel Universe, for example, tends to, in the graphic novel tradition from which it's drawn, tends to give problems to the people most capable of dealing with them, which is not what I want in drama. I don't want the people who have the amazing skill to stop time or set buildings on fire or become invisible. That's not a problem then. That's just an irritation. I want in drama to see folks really put through the ringer, and not to as I see in workshops, I have seen in workshops with short fiction, to suddenly there was a shimmering in the air and a unicorn appeared. I don't want any unicorns.
Yeah, even in fantasy and sci-fi, where the world can be whatever, really world building, you still want if you built a doorway where your people walk around on the ground, then people need to walk around on the ground. If the rules of physics apply everywhere in the universe, which, if you want to step outside of that into fantasy, then the rules have to be consistent. You build a world in which there can be dragons, but people don't become buildings. You've set your set of rules.
No one has a gravity reverser ray. If you build a locked door and it's famously locked and cleverly locked, and you kind of, Chekhov's gun, you want to fire it in the third act, second act, but you don't want to have someone unlock the door too quickly. It just becomes, there are certain specific, Game of Thrones, I felt, unlocked every door too quickly. Benioff and Weiss they had specific problems they had to solve to keep that interesting in every episode. But it just amazed me how often what was presented in the beginning of an episode as the biggest problem one could possibly face was solved 30 minutes later, sometimes just by an argument. Someone who is absolutely resolute. Someone sits down and talks to them and they change their mind. This starts to worry me if I see it happening in a piece of writing, that I'm having circumstance, character, weather, help me out, unlock the door. I don't want the door unlocked. It's an unlocked door for a reason. I want it to be locked. Frodo he can't live next to Mordor. He has to walk. He has to go there. It's a tunnel. You have to go through it. You can't just show up at the end.
Well, I think that we've gotten some really good questions here, and
we could change places and show the other sides of our faces. No, they already know you.
And answered pretty much all the questions that have come up from this. But, I've always thought of it in terms of, imagine your book finished between hardcovers. What's on the cover? What is the mood? What is, and hold that in your mind. Andrew says, imagine the movie poster. What moment from your book is going to be the iconic, and sometimes it's the flavor rather than what happens. It's a certain scene that people will always remember, even though it's not maybe the key to the plot. It might not be the, pulling the sword from the stone. It might be, something like the Grand Inquisitor that isn't even part of the main plot of the book.
As I said in Bridesmaids, your movie isn't about people shitting in the street, but that's what everybody remembers. It colors the thing and adds the flavor, so to speak, where you want it over the open manhole cover.
It's the craziness that is the flavor of that film. That wild thing of somebody, dressed in a bride's out, as a bride, doing something like absolutely.
Perfectly consistent with the tone.
Yeah.
You want to, so also ask yourself with a book, like what would the 20-year-old bookstore employee write on that little card that they put under it saying, this is Angela's favorite? Why? Make it Angela's favorite. Who is Angela? You know, what's she looking for? She reads a lot. She works in a bookstore. You know, what does she find in yours that's not in all the others? I mean, look at all that she's read. What's that thing? What's that thing? How do you put it in there?
Yeah. And you find it from book to book, even authors whose books are very different one from the other. There is a certain quality that makes a Kafka book a Kafka book. You know, what is your flavor? Why do people come to you for your book? What kind of a feeling do you give your reader? What is the world that you're bringing them into that is, you know, it's like bringing somebody into your home, and why is your home different than other people's homes? What makes it unique?
There you go.
There you go. All right. Well, we will see you next week. Andrew is the author of a book called Comedy Writer. So it's advice about comedy writing from somebody who's done it for many, many years and been quite successful about it. And so I wish you good writing, and we'll see you next week.